Hi, this is Chris McKaylee, and on today's video podcast, I wanted to talk about the types of bill amendments that are found in the California Legislature. So there are several types of amendments that can be made to measures, which of course are bills, resolutions, and constitutional amendments in the California Legislature. To begin, an amendment is defined by our Office of Legislative Counsel as an alteration to a bill, a motion, a resolution, or a clause by adding, changing, substituting, or omitting language. And in order to adopt an amendment to any measure, just like an introduction of any measure, the amendment has to be submitted to the Office of Legislative Counsel for final drafting. There are three main ways to make amendments: through author's amendments, committee amendments, or floor amendments. Let's talk about each one. With author's amendments, upon the request of the author, the chair of a committee can make amendments to the bill and process those amendments before the bill is heard in committee. So you can do it before the committee hearing, in which case the author submits them to the chair and the committee processes those amendments prior to the committee hearing itself. Then author's amendments can occur at the committee hearing or on the floor of the Assembly or Senate. And so amendments in committee or on the floor that are done by the author are obviously supported by the bill's author, and he or she can make amendments to their measure. The next type of amendments that are made are committee amendments, which are obviously amendments proposed in committee or by a committee member in that committee hearing. The amendments are adopted by a roll call vote of the committee, although a majority of those present and voting is what is required. They may or may not be acceptable to the author, in which case, if they weren't, they would be deemed hostile amendments. Committee amendments to bills or other measures are considered upon their second reading on the floor. And technically, the amendments to a legislative measure are adopted by a majority vote of the members on the floor. And then ABs or SBs amended on the second reading file by committee amendments are then ordered reprinted and returned to the file. Committee amendments, just like author's amendments, have to be prepared and approved to their form or as to their form by the Office of Legislative Counsel. Committees have requirements such as a specified number of copies, the original being signed, etc., that have to be utilized to process those amendments. And then the third type of bill amendments are floor amendments. And basically, any member can move to amend a measure while it's on second or third reading. And the motion to amend is adopted by a majority of those members present and voting on either the Senate floor or the Assembly floor. Now, amendments to a measure that are offered from the floor, except committee amendments reported, those amendments can be re-referred to committee if necessary. A copy of the measure that's been amended only to add co-authors is not required to be placed upon the desks of the members, but amendments offered from the floor during a measure's second or third reading have to be prepared in advance. If they make substantive changes, then those amendments or the amended version of the bill may be re-referred to the appropriate policy committee. In either instance, in the Assembly or Senate, an analysis is prepared, usually by the first committee of referral, and that analysis is distributed to the members prior to the beginning of debate, hopefully, on the adoption of the proposed amendments. If a measure is amended on the floor, it's generally ordered reprinted and out to print and back on the daily file, and then noticed properly in the daily file based upon the respective Senate or Assembly rules. Now, this requirement usually doesn't apply to a bill that's been amended to add or delete an urgency clause or amendments to make statutory changes to implement the budget bill. Under the joint rules of the Assembly and the Senate, an amendment is supposed to relate to the same subject as the original bill or constitutional amendment. So it has a germaneness rule. And an amendment is not in order when all it would do is add a co-author or co-authors, unless the Rules Committee has granted prior approval, in which case they can be adopted. There are also specified rules for the re-referral of measures that have been substantively amended. And so those have to be considered either by the Speaker's office for a referral under Assembly Rule 77.2 or the Senate Committee on Rules under Senate Rule 29.10. In terms of some other amendments, you might have heard of two other types of amendments, either hostile amendments or gut and amend measures. And hostile amendments can, of course, be made either at a committee hearing or on the floor. And what it means, of course, is that those are not supported by the bill's author. So they are considered amendments that are hostile to the bill author's interests. And those amendments could be obviously proposed by another committee member or a colleague on the floor of the House of Origin or the other house. Gut and amend means amendments to a measure remove the current contents in their entirety, gutting of it, and replacing them with entirely different provisions. That's the amendment piece of it. It does raise the issue of germaneness, whether it's relevant, but germaneness is decided basically by a majority of the members of the Assembly or Senate as to whether or not they believe those amendments coming from the gut and amend are germane or not. Usually the issue is not raised because they are done on a regular basis, particularly towards the House of Origin deadline or the end of the legislative session in the late summer or early fall. So those are the three main types of amendments: author, committee, and floor amendments.